Welcome back to Stay Ahead and welcome to Stage 11 of the Cybersecurity Auditor Mastery series. If you have followed along through Stage 10, you already know how to interpret frameworks, map controls, and spot risks and gaps. Today we go further. Stage 11 is called Audit Methodology and Execution, and this is the stage that takes you from knowledgeable professional to someone who can actually run a full audit start to finish, the same way EY, Deloitte, KPMG, or PwC would. We'll cover planning, scoping, evidence collection, walkthroughs, control testing, sampling, documentation findings, reporting, and remediation validation, all with real world scenarios you would actually run into in the field. This episode is sponsored by Oddity.site. Let's get into it. Here's the roadmap for today, 11 pillars, and by the end of this video, you will be able to speak confidently about every single one of them. Planning, scoping, evidence collection, walkthroughs, control testing, sampling, testing techniques, documentation, audit findings, reporting, and remediation validation. Let's start at the very beginning of every audit before a single test is even run. Audit planning, the foundation. Audit planning defines what you will audit, why you are auditing it, and how you will go about it, and it all happens before any testing begins. Let's decode the jargon first. An audit charter is the formal document that authorizes your team to actually perform the audit. The audit universe is the complete inventory of everything in the organization that could theoretically be audited. A risk assessment ranks those items by likelihood and impact, so you know what to prioritize. The audit plan is your annual or periodic schedule of audits, and the audit scope defines the exact boundaries, which systems, processes, and locations are actually covered. Here's how this plays out in the real world. Imagine a bank wants a cybersecurity audit. You would put the core banking application, database servers, network firewalls, cloud workloads, and SOC operations in scope, because that's where the financial and regulatory risk lies. HR systems and marketing website out of scope. That's not laziness, that's risk-based prioritization, and it's exactly how big four firms decide whether their audit has go. Planning frequent findings and fixes. Now here's a finding you'll see constantly in real audits: no formal risk-based audit plan. The condition: audits gets chosen ad hoc or because a manager asked for one, not because a risk assessment said so. The criteria ISO 27001 and IIA standards actually require a documented risk-based annual plan. The cause is usually that there's no formal risk methodology in place at all, and the consequence is serious. A high risk system like core banking can go unaudited for years, while low risk areas get audited over and over. The fix: build a real audit universe, score every item by likelihood times impact. Get your audit charter signed off by the audit committee or the CISO before fieldwork starts, and revisit that plan every quarter as new systems and risks show up. Scoping. Scoping is what prevents audit creep, and it gives everyone, auditor and auditee alike, a clear boundary before testing even starts. In scope systems are the ones you will actually test. Out of scope systems are explicitly excluded, and control boundaries mark the technical or organizational edge where a given controls authority applies. Picture a hospital audit. In scope, the patient database, the EMR, the electronic medical record system, network segmentation and backup systems. Out of scope, the cafeteria billing system and the public website. Notice the pattern: scope follows where sensitive data, in this case PHI or protected health information, actually lies. And here's a finding that comes up again and again: the scope statement forgets to include third-party EMR vendor access. That's a gap auditors have to catch and add back in, because vendor access is very often where the real risk hides. Evidence collection, pillar 3, and honestly the core of the entire profession: evidence collection. Good evidence has to be sufficient, appropriate, reliable, and traceable. Remember that SART. There are 5 types you will work with: documentary evidence like policies and procedures, physical evidence like screenshots or badge photos, analytical evidence like logs and SIEM reports, testimonial evidence from interviews, and technical evidence like configuration files and vulnerability scans. Real world example: an ITGC, IT General Control audit at a bank. You request firewall rule set, Active Directory user list, CM alert logs, and backup restore test results. Then you validate authenticity, completeness, and timestamp accuracy. Here's a frequent finding: the evidence handed over is a manually curated screenshot instead of a system generated report. That immediately weakens reliability. The fix is simple but important: always pull evidence directly from the source system, cross reference timestamps against an independent clock, and keep a signed chain of custody note for anything sensitive like HR terminations or privileged access lists. Walkthroughs. A walkthrough is a live step by step demonstration of how a control actually works, not just what the policy document claims. Take the control: MFA is enforced for all admin accounts. A proper walkthrough looks like this. Ask an admin to log in live, observe whether the MFA prompt actually appears, check the logs for the MFA event, and inspect the IAM console configuration. If MFA doesn't trigger during the live demo, that's an automatic control failure, no matter what the policy says. And here's the frequently occurring finding that trips people up: policy versus practice mismatch. The written policy requires MFA everywhere, but the walkthrough reveals a legacy service account quietly bypassing it, usually left over from an old migration project. The fix: maintaining a living exceptions trigger, reviewed and reapproved every quarter. Slide 8: control testing. Control testing, and this is where you separate design from operation. Design effectiveness asks: does the control as designed actually make sense for the risk? A password policy requiring 12 plus characters, good design; requiring only 4 characters, bad design. Operating effectiveness asks a different question: is the control as designed actually working in practice? Policy says 12 characters, but the system technically still allows 6 characters. That's an operating failure, even though the design was fine on paper. Real audit scenario: the control quarterly access reviews are performed. You check that review logs exist, the manager approvals are documented, and critically, that unnecessary access is actually removed afterward. The finding you'll see constantly: reviews are completed and signed off, but the flagged excess access never actually gets revoked. That's a classic operating effectiveness failure. Fix it by tying the review sign off to an automated ticket that only closes once removal is confirmed in the IAM system. Sampling. You can't test everything, so you test a defensible sample instead. Random sampling gives every item an equal chance of selection. Judgmental sampling means the auditor deliberately picks high risk or unusual items. Statistical sampling derives sample size and selection mathematically for a target confidence level. Say you're auditing 500 user accounts, you might sample 20 random users, 10 privileged users, and 5 terminated users, checking access appropriateness, timely removal, and role alignment. Here's a finding you will see in almost every access audit: a terminated user retains system access. In this scenario, 2 out of 5 sample terminated employees still had Active Directory accounts more than 30 days after they left. Criteria violated: ISO 27001 A.9.2.6, which requires timely removal of access on termination. Cause: HR's offboarding trigger is manual and is disconnected from IT provisioning. The recommendation: automate deprovisioning through an HRIT integration, often called a joiner mover lever or JML workflow, within a 24-hour SLA. Testing techniques. The actual tools in an auditor's toolkit. Inquiry is asking questions of the control owner: how do you manage privileged accounts? Observation is watching the process happen live, like watching the SOC triage a real alert. Inspection is reviewing documents and configs, like checking firewalls rules against policy. And re-performance is independently redoing the control yourself. Attempting a password reset to confirm MFA really triggers. Here's the auditor's tip that separates amateurs from professionals. The strongest conclusions combine at least 2 techniques: inquiry plus re-performance. For example, never rely on inquiry alone is the weakest form of evidence, because people can simply tell you what you want to hear. Documentation. Your audit work papers. Work papers are the permanent defensible record of your scope, procedures, evidence, findings, and conclusions. A work paper is a single file capturing one test end to end and cross referencing links that work paper back to the specific framework control it maps to. For example, a work paper titled Firewall Rule Review would contain a screenshot of the rule set, a risk analysis narrative, a mapping to 27001 A.13.1.1, and the auditor's final conclusion. The finding to watch for: incomplete or unlinked work papers. Evidence is stored, but the auditor's conclusion or framework mapping is missing. That falls apart under any external quality review. The fix is a standardized template with mandatory fields reviewed and signed off by a second auditor. Audit findings. Writing like Big Four. Every strong finding follows the 5 C's: condition, what you found; criteria, what should exist; why it happened; cause, consequence, the resulting risk; and recommendation, how to fix it. Here's a real example, and this is the exact structure you should be writing in your own reports. Condition: MFA is not enforced for admin accounts. Criteria: ISO 27001 A.9.4.2 requires strong authentication for privileged access. Cause: a misconfiguration in the IAM policy after recent system migration. Consequence: high risk of admin account compromise through credential theft or password spraying. Recommendation: enforce MFA immediately and add configuration drift monitoring so it doesn't silently break again. Frequently occurring findings. Before we move to reporting, let's do a quick fire round. The findings you'll see in almost every single audit, regardless of industry: weak passwords or no MFA on privileged accounts, high risk; terminated users retaining system access, high risk; firewall rules with no documented business justification, medium; access reviews performed but access never removed, medium; missing or untested backup and restore evidence, high; patch management SLAs missed for critical vulnerabilities, high; security policies not reviewed in over 12 months, low; and no formal incident response tabletop exercise conducted, medium. If you are studying for this field, memorize this list. It will show up on almost every engagement you ever work. Reporting. Executive level communication. A good report is clear, concise, risk force, and actionable. The executive summary is a one-page, non-technical overview of scope, key risks, and your overall opinion. Risk ratings categorize severity as high, medium, or low, and we are presenting to the CIO, Chief Information Officer. You translate everything into business impact, dollars, downtime, and reputation, not raw technical jargon. Say your report has 3 high risk, 5 medium, and 7 low. Here's a gap that shows up constantly, even in experienced teams. The report lists every finding but never states an overall opinion. Big Four reports always close with one clear line, something like controls are partially effective, a statement the CIO can literally quote to the board. Remediation validation. Pill 11, the final one. Remediation validation, also known as the follow-up audit. An audit isn't finished when the report goes out. You have to verify the fixes were actually implemented and that they actually work. Take a weak password policy finding. The remediation is claim policy updated and enforced in Active Directory. But you don't just take their word for it. You validate by attempting to create a weak password yourself and confirming the system now rejects it. Only then does the findings get marked closed. The finding to watch for here: findings closed without retesting. Closed in the tracker purely on a written attestation from IT with no independent verification. That's how the same control failure quietly reappears next year and damages the audit's credibility. The rule: no self-correction closures ever. Require independent reperformance evidence before you close anything. End-to-end flow. So let's connect all 11 pillars into one continuous flow: plan, scope, collect evidence, walk through, test, control, sample, apply techniques, document, write findings, report, validate the fix. But here's the key mindset shift: audits are not strictly linear. If evidence looks fabricated halfway through, you go straight back to rescoping and retesting. Real audits loop back constantly. A great example of this whole flow in action is a SOC2 Type 2 or readiness audit. A mid-sized SaaS company runs this exact 11-step process over about 6 6 weeks. Planning and scoping with compliance team, collecting a full evidence set, walking through access provisioning, testing operative effectiveness across the review period, sampling terminated users and change tickets, documenting work papers, and finally issuing a report their sales team can hand straight to enterprise prospects. So where does the that leave you after stage 11? You can now plan and scope audits using a risk-based methodology, collect and validate evidence against the SART standard, perform live walkthroughs, test both design and operative effectiveness, apply defensible sampling, use inquiry, observation, inspection and re-performance correctly, build audit grade work papers, write Big Four style findings using the 5Cs, present risk focused reports to executives and validate remediation through independent retesting. In short, you now operate like a professional cybersecurity auditor capable of running a full engagement end to end. Coming next, stage 12, soft skills and stakeholder management. Because knowing the methodology is only half the job, you also need to handle resistance from IT teams, ask the right questions, manage conflict, deliver executive reporting with confidence, and bring the professional skepticism that defines how Big Four auditors actually behave in real engagements. That's stage 11 in full. If this series is helping you build real audit skills, make sure you're subscribed to stay ahead so you don't miss stage 12. This episode was sponsored by Audity.site. I'll see you in the next one.